Every single day felt exactly the same. Brutal. Quickly fell behind. Very hard to make new friends. Started getting burnt out. My marks dropped quite a bit. 40%. Terrible trade-off. 3 out of 5 geese. You guys seem to like my video about my first semester of Waterloo Computer Science. So now that second semester is over, I thought I'd make a video sharing some thoughts about second semester and first year in general. I also wanted to make this video because it's sort of nice to recap everything that I learned this semester before I forget it in a few weeks. So this term I took 6 courses, including CS 136, Math 136, Math 138, Earth 122, Bet 100, and PD 1. Now before I get into the courses, I thought I'd just share some overall thoughts about the term and first year in general. This term felt quite different from the fall term in that there was more work, the work was more challenging, and as a result, it was more stressful. For the first month, I was focused solely on trying to land my spring co-op, and so applying, interviewing, doing interview prep, all that stuff took up so much time, and I quickly fell behind in my classes. Eventually, I did land an internship, and so a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders, but I had to catch up on schoolwork. For the rest of the term, every single day felt exactly the same. You know, wake up at 1 p.m., eat, watch some lectures, eat again, procrastinate a bit, work on assignments until like 3 in the morning, eat again, and then sleep at 5 a.m. A week before finals, I started getting burnt out, and I just wanted to get the term over with. Final season was pretty rough. I had 4 finals over 3 consecutive days, and not much time to study for them, so that week was definitely really stressful. I'd say the courses that I took this term were harder than the ones that I took in my first term, and so my marks dropped quite a bit, but that's not really a big deal. You know, marks aren't everything. Now, like I said, every day this term felt exactly the same, but it still went by really quick. In fact, all of first year went by really quick, and it feels like just not that long ago I said, "Today is Tuesday, September 8th, aka the first day of school." And it's crazy to think that I've already completed a quarter of my university courses completely online. Speaking of online school, I got a few comments about the social life at Waterloo, and from an online student's perspective, I can say that it was actually very hard to make new friends online. I mean, I have talked to a few new people, but the conversations were pretty short, just, complaining about school or complaining about finding co-op. Most of my social interaction was just with friends from high school. So it wasn't too hard to talk to new people, but it was hard to make new friends. I'm sure it is possible, it's just quite difficult when everything is online. So my overall thoughts about first year? Academically, it was hard, but manageable. Some courses were quite painful, while others were really enjoyable. And in terms of the social aspect of my first year, there was no social aspect. Oh, and one more thing, I think the most important lesson that I learned this year was to start assignments early. I almost never did that and submitted things at the very last minute, which just caused a lot of unnecessary stress. Anyways, with all of that out of the way, let's get into the courses. Starting off with CS 136, a course that builds on top of some of the topics that we learned in CS 135, except using an imperative language rather than a functional language, which we used in CS 135. Specifically, this course was taught in C, which is much more enjoyable than Racket. We started off learning some basic programming concepts like loops, control flow, I/O, and functions. Then we learned about the C memory model, how the call stack works, pointers, and modularization. After that, we learned about arrays, binary search, stacks, and a few sorting algorithms, including selection sort, insertion sort, and quicksort. Next was analyzing the efficiency of algorithms, including big O notation and recurrence relations. After that was all about strings, and if you didn't know, C doesn't have a built-in string type, so the convention is that C strings are just arrays of characters. The course got more interesting when we learned about dynamic memory, using malloc, realloc, and free, which allowed us to implement merge sort using dynamic arrays. At this point, assignments started getting more challenging, especially facing memory leaks, segmentation faults, and heap buffer overflows. After that was all about linked data structures and how to implement them. Things like linked lists, queues, binary search trees, and dictionaries. The final thing we learned was void pointers, which allowed us to implement generic ADTs, abstract data types, which would work for any data type. So you could have a stack that works for strings or integers or characters or any type. This was probably the most well-organized course I took this term. The content was interesting and overall it was a very enjoyable course. Now, having had prior programming experience, I didn't find the course extremely challenging, but some of the assignments were definitely really time-consuming. So each week involved a lecture, a self-check quiz, and an assignment. The lectures and self-checks took 2 to 3 hours each week, whereas the assignments took 10 to 12 hours, except for the last assignment. The last assignment was brutal. I think I spent about 20 hours on that assignment, and it was due just a few days before finals started, so I sacrificed a lot of time that I could have spent studying to work on that assignment instead. And it actually ended up being one of my lowest assignment marks, so that was like a terrible trade-off. So yeah, this was the most time-consuming course I took this term, taking about 12 to 15 hours each week. Oh yeah, and most of the assignments were pretty fun. I think my favorite question involved converting grayscale images to black and white through a process known as dithering. So overall, I'd say it was a great course. We're bringing back the geese rating, and CS 136 gets a solid 5 out of 5 geese. Next up is Math 136, Linear Algebra. The course started off pretty simple with stuff that we learned in grade 12 calculus and vectors. So things like lines and planes, dot product, cross product, projection. Then we learned about linear combinations, spanning sets, and solving systems of equations using matrices by converting them to what's known as row-reduced echelon form. It turns out that row-reducing a matrix is actually connected to a bunch of different ideas in linear algebra, so I think I did that like a million times in this course. Next was matrix multiplication, linear transformations, the inverse of matrices, and determinants. After that, we learned about the eigenvalue problem and how it relates to a matrix being diagonalizable. Then we learned about subspaces, bases, linear independence, converting between different bases, and linear operators. At the end of the course, we learned about abstract vector spaces and the row space of a matrix. And the very last lecture was about the invertible matrix theorem, which is when everything from the course came together into this one theorem. And it was nice to see how all these ideas were connected to whether or not a matrix was invertible. Now, I found the course content to be mediocre. It wasn't like extremely interesting or anything, but it also wasn't boring. Each week I spent about 4 hours watching lectures, reading course notes, and doing practice questions. And there were also weekly quizzes and assignments that took 5 to 6 hours each week. The quizzes alternated between computational and conceptual ones, whereas the weekly assignments were more focused on proofs, and sometimes they had some computations in them too. These assignments took a long time to write up, with some needing 12 to 15 pages. So in total, I spent between 9 to 10 hours each week on this course. In terms of difficulty, most of the concepts in the course were pretty easy to grasp. It's just that there was a lot of content being thrown at you each week, and you sort of had to keep track of all the different definitions, lemmas, theorems, and things like that. Overall, I didn't really enjoy the course that much. I think I found Math 135 to be more interesting, but this course wasn't too difficult, so I'd give it 4 out of 5 geese. Moving on, we have Math 138, which is Calculus 2. I wasn't looking forward to this course because I didn't really enjoy Calculus 1, and it was also my lowest mark last term. I started off this course with 40% on the first 2 assignments because I tried learning the content a few hours before the assignment was due, and so I only had like 1.5 hours to work on the actual assignment. That was clearly a terrible idea, but it happened a few more times until the 5th assignment because I wasn't managing my time properly. Eventually, I got it together, started learning the content early, doing the assignments early, going to office hours, and I did much better on the later assignments. So the course content can be broken down into 3 sections: integration, differential equations, and series. We started off with Riemann sums, which led to the concept of integrals, the average value of a function, and the fundamental theorem of calculus. Next, we learned a bunch of different integration techniques, including change of variable, trig substitution, integration by parts, partial fractions, and also evaluating improper integrals. After that was about applications of integration, so finding areas between curves and finding volumes of revolution using the shell method and the disk method. The next section was about differential equations, so we learned how to solve separable and first order linear differential equations, and then we applied that to exponential growth and decay, Newton's law of cooling, logistic growth, and mixing problems. The last section was all about series. We started off with numerical series, learning about geometric series and a bunch of different tests that you can perform to check whether a series converges or diverges. Following that was about power series, how to represent functions as a power series, and how to integrate and differentiate power series. The last few topics were about binomial series and Taylor series, and how we could use them to find sums and evaluate limits and integrals. Each week, I spent 3 to 4 hours learning the material and sometimes doing the practice assignments, and there were also weekly assignments which I spent varying time on. So as I mentioned, at the beginning of the term, I was so behind and I only spent 1 to 2 hours on the assignments, but as I got more on top of things and started the assignments earlier, I spent 4 to 5 hours on them. So on average, I spent around 6 hours per week on this course. One more thing about the assignments, they included about 10 multiple choice questions and a written question as well. These multiple choice questions were tricky, and there were also no part marks. So you could have a question with 5 options, you select 2 of them, they're both right, but you missed the 3rd correct option, so you get 2 out of the 3 choices correct, but you get 0 marks. And that's actually 7% of your assignment mark just gone, just because of that little mistake. And that happened to me many, many times on these assignments and on the midterm. So it was definitely kind of annoying, but you know, it is what it is. Overall, I found the course content pretty interesting, but I didn't really like the way that we were assessed with these multiple choice questions that were worth so much with no part marks. And this also ended up being my lowest mark in university so far. So I'd have to give Math 138 3 out of 5 geese. The fourth course is Earth 122, which is an introductory environmental science course. I took it as a bird course, so I wasn't really expecting that much, but I actually enjoyed it quite a lot because the professor was amazing. He was clearly passionate about the field, very friendly, and had great video lectures every week. So my camera battery just died, so I had to switch to my phone here. There was a lot of content in this course with 19 chapters, and each chapter having between 60 to 70 slides. Some of the things that we learned about in this course include ecology, human population, soil, agriculture, conservation of species, forest management, freshwater systems and fisheries, atmospheric science and air pollution, climate change, fossil fuels, minerals, managing our waste, and environmental health hazards. Each week we'd have 2 lectures and a quiz, and these lectures usually took 2.5 hours to get through, and the quiz was only 15 minutes long, so there was less than 3 hours of work for this course each week. As I mentioned, there was a lot of content packed into each lecture, but there were many environmental science pictures which were cool to look at. Overall, the course was relatively light and easy. All the assessments were just multiple choice questions, and I'd highly recommend taking this course. So I give Earth 122 a solid 5 out of 5 geese. Next we have Bet 100, which is like an introductory entrepreneurship course, and I took it because I had some interest in entrepreneurship, and I also heard it was a bird course. This course was centered around creating a business plan, and we did this gradually through 5 assignments, which had modules to introduce some key ideas and also motivate the purpose of each assignment. So the first assignment involved researching 3 important problems and then going deeper into one of them to explain its importance and how it's growing. The second assignment involved a lot of research as well. You had to choose one of the 3 problems from the first assignment and then expand on its importance and why it exists, as well as describe recent attempts to solve that problem and analyze the mistakes that people made when they were solving that problem. And so the idea was to learn from past mistakes that people made when they were trying to solve this problem. The third assignment was called a design sprint, which involved defining the problem that you're going to solve, describing a few user personas, brainstorming 8 possible solutions, and then choosing one of those solutions and creating like a storyboard and pitch for it. The fourth assignment was pretty simple. It involved describing 2 customer segments and then a value proposition for each customer segment. In other words, find 2 groups that face the problem and would benefit from the solution, and what value are we creating for them. The fifth and final assignment is when everything came together into a business model canvas, where we had to describe customer segments, customer relationships, channels, value propositions, key activities, key resources, key partners, the cost structure, and the revenue streams. So when I finished that assignment, it was nice to see how I had developed my original idea into like an actual business plan that could actually be successful. And if you're curious, my business idea was related to like social networking. In terms of time spent on this course, it really depended on the assignment. So the third and the fourth assignment were really short, but the other ones took quite a long time. And so I'd say like the average assignment took maybe 4 to 5 hours, And since they were due bi-weekly, you could average that out to saying that this course took 2 to 2.5 hours each week. Overall, aside from doing all that research at the beginning, I think it was actually quite fun to go through the process of creating a business model. So as I said, the course wasn't too time consuming, but the only thing that I didn't really like about it was that the first few assignments were marked kind of harshly. Like, I spent more time on the first assignment than I did on the third and the fourth combined, but I got a significantly higher mark on the third and the fourth. So it's a fun and light course. The marking was a bit harsh at the beginning, so I'd give the course 4 out of 5 geese. Finally, we have PD1, which is this mandatory course that all co-op students have to take before their first work term. Most people find this course useless and a waste of time, and after going through the course myself, I'd have to agree with that. So you're supposed to learn things like resumes, cover letters, interviews, networking, how to be successful at work, learn about your values and personality, but I don't think I gained that much from this course because most of it was just common knowledge. So we had to do 8 assignments and they took about 45 minutes each, but luckily you didn't really have to do too well on them because this was a credit, no credit course, and you only had to get 60% to get the credit. Although the course wasn't very useful, the assignments were quick and easy, so I'd give the course 3 out of 5 geese. And that concludes my first year of Waterloo Computer Science, which wasn't actually as hard as I was expecting, but it was still quite challenging. This summer, I'll be doing my first co-op term as a front-end engineer at a unicorn, and I'm super excited to start working, but I'm also very nervous because I feel like I don't know anything. And then after that, I'll be starting second year, which I feel like is gonna be a lot harder than first year, so I'm just not gonna think about it for now. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.